After the divorce papers were signed, secretly and immediately, I canceled all of my husband's financial access, including his debit and credit cards. One night, as he celebrated his lavish wedding to his mistress, a $50,000 affair, the music suddenly stopped. The ballroom fell silent, and then I walked in, accompanied by a mysterious man. A single sentence spoken by him shattered everything. The atmosphere in the mediation room of the county courthouse was icy and tense, as if the air conditioning was working overtime to freeze the emotions in the air. On one side of the long, polished wooden table sat a man in an expensive suit, oozing with confidence. That was Damien. His face wore a poorly concealed expression of victory. He leaned back in his padded chair, looking at the woman seated across from him with disdain. That woman was Eleanor, his wife, or rather, the woman who in a few short moments would officially become his ex-wife. Eleanor sat with serene composure. Her hands rested neatly in her lap atop a classic dress. A simple, immaculate silk scarf framed an expressionless face. There were no tears or anger, only a calm that made it difficult to guess her thoughts. Damien's lawyer placed a thick file in front of Eleanor. The sound of paper grazing the table's surface echoed in the silent room. Damien smirked cynically and began to speak in a deliberately loud tone, as if to ensure everyone in the room heard how magnificent he was. He said Eleanor's decision to divorce him was the biggest mistake of her life. Damien continued to rant about how Eleanor couldn't possibly survive in the big city without him. He called her a mere housewife who had lived comfortably thanks to his hard work as the CEO of the company. According to Damien, Eleanor had no skills beyond spending the money he generated. Those words dripped from his mouth, filled with unbridled contempt and arrogance. Eleanor didn't interrupt Damien. She let the man completely empty his mind. Inside, Eleanor marveled at how money and a title could transform the person she once loved into a strange, pathetic creature. She remembered perfectly how Damien had approached her with impeccable manners, begging for her parents' blessing, who were hesitant at the time. But now, Damien felt the world was at his feet. Eleanor's lawyer was about to interrupt Damien's rude remarks, but Eleanor gave him a subtle hand signal to hold back. She wanted to hear it all. She wanted to burn this moment into her memory as a powerful reason not to turn back. When Damien finished his triumphant speech, he held out his expensive fountain pen to Eleanor, challenging her to sign the document if she truly dared to live in poverty. He even added that he wouldn't give her a single cent of the marital assets and was sure Eleanor would come crawling back in less than a month, begging for money. Eleanor took the pen with a slow movement, glancing over the points of the document. Everything was according to her plan. No claims on property, no claims on stocks, a clean, no strings attached divorce. To Damien, this was an absolute victory, as he felt he could now control all the assets he had managed. For Eleanor, it was the key that unlocked the trap she had set. The tip of the pen touched the white paper. With a firm motion and without the slightest hesitation, Eleanor placed her signature over the line. The black ink traced the end of their 5-year marriage. The sound of the pen was so decisive it denoted the absence of any hesitation in her heart. When she finished, she closed the file and slid it back toward Damien's lawyer. The mediating judge, witnessing the scene, could only sigh deeply at the hard-heartedness of both parties, albeit in different ways. Damien snatched the file, reviewed it with a wide grin, and then let out a chuckle. He felt as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He felt free to be openly with Sylvia, free to enjoy the wealth he claimed as the fruit of his own labor. Eleanor rose from her chair, briefly straightened her clothes, and looked at Damien one last time. He was still busy shaking his lawyer's hand, celebrating an illusory victory. Without a word to Damien, Eleanor turned and walked toward the exit. Her steps were light, as if a 1,000-ton burden had just been lifted from her back. Damien shouted from behind her not to forget the way out, because he wouldn't be walking her. Eleanor didn't turn back. She opened the courtroom door, walked down the busy courthouse hallway, and continued until she reached the main lobby, where her car was already waiting. The sun shone brightly outside the courthouse, a stark contrast to the icy treatment from Damien inside. Eleanor got into a comfortable black luxury sedan, settled into the back seat, and exhaled a long sigh. Her personal driver, an older man loyal to Eleanor's family for many years, politely asked if everything had gone well. Eleanor simply nodded with a faint smile. Then, she took a tablet out of her handbag. The screen lit up, displaying the logo of a prestigious private bank where all the family's and the company's assets were held. Eleanor entered a two-factor authentication code and scanned her fingerprint to access the system as the primary administrator. A clear financial diagram appeared on the screen, one she had been quietly monitoring. It showed several interconnected corporate and personal accounts. For the past 5 years, Damien had held a secondary access card with a nearly unlimited limit. Damien believed it was his personal account. In reality, it was just a facility Eleanor's family had granted their son-in-law to facilitate company operations. Damien had forgotten, or perhaps was too arrogant to realize, that he had never been the primary account holder. Every asset, from the luxurious townhouse they lived in and the cars in the garage to the platinum credit card he used to show off, was linked to Eleanor's family trust. Eleanor's finger glided across the tablet screen. She entered the User Access Management menu. There, Damien's name was listed with the status of CEO, full access. Eleanor tapped the Edit button. Without the slightest hesitation, she changed the access status, selecting the option to block all additional credit cards, freeze access to cash withdrawals, and disconnect the digital token for company transfers. The system asked for one final confirmation, warning that this action would paralyze all financial activity for the affected user. Eleanor pressed the Confirm button firmly. The screen processed the command for a few seconds, showing a spinning circle before displaying a large green checkmark with the text, "Access successfully revoked." Eleanor leaned back into the plush car seat. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining what would happen next. Damien would be on his way to his freedom at that very moment, perhaps planning a big party to celebrate the divorce. Eleanor knew her ex-husband's character well. Damien was the type of person who needed recognition. He would surely waste no time in flaunting his wealth to hide the fact that he had just failed at his marriage. Eleanor murmured to herself, bidding farewell to her painful past. She was no longer the wife who stayed quiet at home. She was the rightful owner of the business empire Damien had claimed as his own. The sedan weaved through the city traffic, carrying Eleanor away from the courthouse. In the silence of the car, Eleanor opened a messaging app on her phone. There was an incoming message from Mr. Hayes, a distant cousin and a trusted confidant of her late father, who had been helping her oversee the company from the shadows. The message was brief. "Phase 1 is complete." Eleanor typed a quick reply, confirming the divorce was signed and the financial access completely severed. She also added instructions for Mr. Hayes to prepare for the next phase. The game had just begun, and this time, Eleanor was in full control of the board. Damien walked out of the courthouse with a confident stride, and his chest puffed out. He felt like a bird just released from its cage. He immediately took out his smartphone and dialed the number he had been calling the most lately. The name Sylvia appeared on the screen. As soon as the call connected, Sylvia's honeyed voice greeted him. Damien proudly announced that he was now officially a rich, handsome, and single man. He told Sylvia that Eleanor hadn't claimed anything, which meant the entire company fortune and personal assets were now safely in his hands. Sylvia screamed with joy on the other end of the line, praising Damien's negotiating skills, completely unaware that it was all a trap. Without wasting any time, Damien suggested they meet to celebrate this historic day. They agreed to plan their wedding as soon as possible. Damien wanted to prove to the world, and especially to Eleanor's family, that he could be happy and successful without the shadow of his ex-wife. He picked up Sylvia in his luxurious company car. Sylvia was already waiting, perfectly made up, and ready to spend Damien's money. Their destination that day was the most prestigious 5-star hotel in Midtown Manhattan, the usual venue for tycoons and high-ranking officials to hold extravagant weddings. Upon arriving at the hotel, they were graciously welcomed by the reception staff. Damien, with an air of arrogance, asked to speak directly with the ballroom's event director. He said he wanted to book the most expensive wedding package available for the earliest possible date. The hotel manager, a professional-looking middle-aged man, received them in his elegant office. He presented them with a catalog of exclusive wedding packages. Sylvia's eyes sparkled as she saw photos of decorations filled with imported flowers and crystal chandeliers. Without hesitation, she pointed to the imperial nuptial package, priced at $500,000 for just the venue rental and basic catering, not including the additional decorations she desired. Damien, wanting to look like a big shot in front of his future wife, agreed to Sylvia's choice without haggling. He even added special requests for a premium menu and top-tier service. The hotel manager smiled broadly as he calculated the total cost. He explained that to lock in the date and begin preparations on such short notice, they would need to pay a minimum 50% deposit, though a full payment would be better to secure their priority. With a dismissive gesture, Damien pulled out his leather wallet and took out the black credit card that had always been his symbol of social status. He placed it on the marble desk with a confident clack. The hotel manager politely took the card and inserted it into the terminal on his desk. Damien looked at Sylvia with a smile, imagining how magnificent their party would be. However, that smile slowly faded as the hotel manager's brow furrowed. The terminal emitted a long beep and printed a small receipt with the word "declined." The manager tried swiping it again, thinking it might be a magnetic strip error or a poor internet connection, but the result was the same. The machine rejected the transaction. Damien started to feel uncomfortable. He laughed awkwardly, saying that perhaps the card's chip was dirty or damaged from frequent use. He then pulled out another credit card from his wallet, this time a platinum card from a different bank. He handed it to the manager with some nervousness but tried to maintain his composure. The manager tried to process the transaction again. The seconds of waiting for authorization felt like hours to Damien, and once again the machine rejected it. The message on the screen read, "Contact issuing bank." Damien's face began to flush with embarrassment. Sylvia was looking at him with a questioning expression. The smile on her face began to fade, replaced by anxiety. Damien quickly made an excuse, saying the banking system must be experiencing a massive outage or maintenance, which was why all his transactions were blocked. To save face, Damien finally took out the company checkbook he always carried in his briefcase. He knew it was a bit risky to use company money for personal purposes so directly, but he thought that as the CEO, he could fix it later with the finance department. He wrote the amount of $500,000 on the check with a slightly trembling hand and signed it. He handed the check to the hotel manager, saying in a firm tone that this check would certainly clear, as it was from a major corporation's account. The hotel manager accepted the check, examined it briefly, and nodded. He said he would process it immediately with the clearing department, but since Damien was a VIP client, by his assumption, the reservation could be confirmed for now. Damien sighed in relief. He had overcome that small crisis. After the hotel business, Sylvia dragged Damien to jewelry boutiques and wedding dress shops. Sylvia's shopping spree seemed insatiable. She chose a massive diamond ring and a dress from a renowned designer. When trying to pay for the ring, Damien used his personal debit card for a much smaller transaction than the ballroom rental, but once again, the transaction failed. The boutique cashier looked at Damien with pity. Damien truly panicked. He tried to open his mobile banking app on his phone to make a transfer, but he couldn't log in, receiving a notification. "Your account has been temporarily locked. Please contact your branch." Cold sweat began to trickle down Damien's temples. He told Sylvia that his phone probably had a virus or had been hacked, which was why the banking app was giving an error for security reasons. Sylvia was starting to look annoyed and suspicious. However, Damien managed to convince her with sweet promises that he would sort out all these technical issues at the bank the next morning, and she could buy anything she wanted. For that day, Damien was forced to take Sylvia home empty-handed, except for the promise of the lavish party they had just booked. In the car, Damien tried calling his mother. He hoped he could borrow some cash to get by, but his hopes were dashed when his mother's voice on the phone sounded angry. She had already heard about Damien and Eleanor's divorce from other relatives. His mother scolded him harshly for divorcing Eleanor, who had always been a good daughter-in-law from a respected family. She refused to lend him any money and told Damien to solve his own problems like a grown man. Damien threw his phone onto the car seat in frustration. He felt like the world was conspiring against him that day. He didn't realize it wasn't a conspiracy of the universe, but the cold execution of Eleanor's plan. Meanwhile, in the hotel manager's office, the manager was on the phone with someone after Damien and Sylvia had left. He spoke in a respectful tone. On the other end of the line was Eleanor's personal assistant. The hotel manager reported that Damien had just handed over a company check to pay for the party. Eleanor's assistant gave specific instructions. Let the party preparations continue, accept the check, but don't deposit it until the day of the event to give Damien a false sense of security. Eleanor wanted Damien to sink even deeper into the trap of debt and shame. The hotel manager understood and hung up. The party would go on, but not as a celebration of love, but as the stage for the destruction of Damien's arrogance. The morning after the dramatic hotel booking, Damien woke with a sense of unease. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the curtains of the luxury apartment he had rented the previous month as a temporary residence with Sylvia. His head felt heavy, not from lack of sleep, but from worry about his credit cards, which had suddenly stopped working the day before. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face roughly, trying to convince himself it had just been a temporary glitch in the central banking system. He was the CEO of a major company. It was impossible for a bank to block his access without prior notice. Damien picked up his phone from the nightstand, hoping to find a message from the bank explaining the situation, but his phone's screen was clear of any banking notifications. Instead, there was a message from Sylvia, who had already woken up, saying she was waiting for him in the lobby, impatient to continue their wedding shopping agenda. Damien showered and dressed quickly. He put on his best shirt and a designer watch to bolster his slightly wavering confidence. When he went down to the lobby, he saw Sylvia sitting relaxed, flipping through a fashion magazine. Sylvia's face lit up when she saw Damien. She immediately stood up and took his arm flirtatiously, reminding him of the long list of things they had to buy that day. Sylvia wanted to buy imported designer shoes, a limited edition leather handbag, and even order special wedding favors flown in from abroad. Damien smiled grimly, nodding along to all her requests while trying to figure out how he would pay for everything if his credit cards were still blocked. He decided to try his luck again that day, hoping the banking system had returned to normal. Their first destination was a luxury handbag and shoe boutique in the city's most exclusive shopping mall. Sylvia entered the store as if she were a queen inspecting her kingdom. The staff, trained to cater to wealthy clients, welcomed them graciously, offering cold drinks and small snacks. Sylvia, without hesitation, pointed out 3 handbags, each priced equivalent to a new motorcycle. She also tried on several pairs of crystal-encrusted high heels. Damien just sat on the waiting sofa, his heart pounding every time Sylvia said, "I'll take this one." The total of Sylvia's purchases that morning amounted to tens of thousands of dollars in less than an hour. Damien felt cold sweat soaking his back as Sylvia gestured for the clerk to take everything to the register. At the counter, Damien slowly pulled out his wallet. He took out a different platinum credit card than the one he had used at the hotel the previous day, hoping this one from another bank wouldn't have any issues. The clerk inserted the card into the terminal. Damien held his breath, his eyes fixed on the machine's small screen. The seconds ticked by very slowly, then came a painful short beep. The clerk looked at Damien politely but with a flicker of doubt in his eyes, informing him that the transaction had been declined due to a security code. Damien tried to laugh it off to hide his embarrassment. He said loudly, for Sylvia and other customers to hear, that his bank probably restricted large transactions upon detecting suspicious activity for the security of priority clients like him. Sylvia was starting to look annoyed. She gave Damien a demanding look, as if asking what the point was of being a CEO's wife if she couldn't even go shopping. Damien, not wanting to lose face in front of his future wife and the staff, asked for the store's account number. He promised he would have his finance staff at the office make a direct wire transfer from the company account that very day. The clerk seemed hesitant, as their standard procedure was full payment at the time of purchase for items being taken. But Damien pulled out his business card with the title of CEO. He convinced the store manager that he was an important person and the payment would arrive before the afternoon. Fearing to offend a potential major client, the manager finally allowed them to take the items on the condition that Damien send proof of the transfer within 3 hours. Leaving the boutique, Damien felt a little relieved, but the burden on his shoulders was growing heavier. He now had a promise of a transfer he needed to sort out immediately. However, Sylvia was not satisfied. She dragged Damien to a nearby luxury car dealership. Sylvia begged him to buy her a new sports car as a wedding gift. She wanted to arrive at gatherings with her friends in a new car to show off. Damien, whose ego was as big as the sky, couldn't refuse. He figured that buying a car was usually done through a leasing or financing process managed by the finance company, so he wouldn't need to swipe a credit card on the spot. This seemed safer for his strange financial situation. At the dealership, they were greeted by a very enthusiastic salesman. Damien chose a brilliant red sedan that cost a fortune. He sat in the driver's seat, gripped the leather steering wheel, and felt the sense of power he needed again. After a brief test drive, Damien sat in a glass-walled office with the salesman to process the paperwork. He confidently handed over his driver's license and social security number for the lease application's data verification process. He was sure his credit history was impeccable, as all his installments had been paid on time through automatic debits from Eleanor's main account, which he believed was his. The salesman typed Damien's details into the computer, smiling pleasantly at first. But the salesman's smile slowly vanished as he saw the results on the monitor. His face became stiff and uncomfortable. He called his superior, a manager, to look at the screen. They whispered seriously while glancing sideways at Damien. Damien started to feel offended by the treatment. He gently tapped the table and asked what the problem was, as he was in a hurry. The dealership manager finally approached Damien with a face that was no longer friendly. He explained coldly that Damien's credit application had been automatically rejected by the central system. The reason was that Damien's name was on the financing group's internal blacklist due to indications of frozen assets and an ownership dispute. Damien's jaw dropped. He became enraged, accusing the dealership system of having problems. He shouted that he was a CEO with a huge salary, that it was impossible for him to be on a blacklist. The commotion attracted the attention of other visitors. Sylvia, who was busy taking pictures next to the red car, stopped and came over to Damien. She asked in a panic why Damien was shouting. Damien, now completely embarrassed, roughly pulled Sylvia's hand and dragged her out of the place. He told her the service there was terrible and they didn't deserve his money. In the car, Damien couldn't stop cursing, blaming everyone but himself. He was confused by the term ownership dispute they had mentioned. Panicked, Damien finally called his secretary and the CFO at the office. He demanded to know why all his financial access was having problems and why there were rumors of an asset freeze. On the other end of the line, the CFO sounded confused and scared. He explained that since that morning, the financial access token Damien used was no longer valid. The bank had reported a change in the authorized signatory structure by the primary shareholder. Damien fell silent. He had just realized he had never held the majority stake. The shares belonged to Eleanor's family, but he never expected her to act so far and so fast. Damien tried to deny this reality. He ordered the CFO to cash a check immediately and send it to his personal account to cover his urgent needs. But the CFO politely refused, fearing he would violate the new, strict procedures. Amid the chaos and Damien's growing confusion, a thick, cream-colored envelope landed on Eleanor's desk at the corporate group's headquarters, a place Damien rarely visited. Eleanor was sitting, reviewing reports on her tablet. Her personal assistant handed her the envelope respectfully. It was the physical wedding invitation for Damien and Sylvia. The design was very luxurious, with gold ink and imported paper, exactly to Sylvia's extravagant taste. Eleanor opened the invitation slowly, with no expression of sadness on her face. Instead, she smiled faintly, a smile that was hard to interpret. The invitation listed the date and venue for the party, to be held in 2 days. Eleanor picked up her pen and wrote a single word on the RSVP card, attending. Then she handed the card back to her assistant to be sent to Damien's address. Eleanor knew her presence there would not be as a guest, but as the executioner who would end this long farce. The day Damien and Sylvia had been waiting for finally arrived. Their wedding day, designed with incredible extravagance, meant to be proof of their social status, now felt like a ticking time bomb to Damien. Since morning, Damien had been at the hotel. He hadn't been able to sleep all night, harassed by collection messages from various vendors. The clothing boutique demanded the proof of transfer that never came. The jewelry store threatened to repossess their items, and the decorators were asking for the remaining payment before the event began that evening. Damien felt like he was in quicksand. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. He was constantly lying to everyone, saying the money was in the process of bank clearing and would arrive that afternoon. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the hotel ballroom was one of frantic activity. Workers were setting up thousands of fresh flowers brought in from out of town. The majestic crystal chandeliers were already hung, reflecting a dazzling golden light. A thick red carpet stretched from the entrance to the altar, designed to look like a fairy tale palace. Sylvia seemed very happy. She was busy giving orders to the workers, asking for flowers in one corner to be changed or the lighting on one side to be dimmed. Sylvia had no idea about the storm swirling in her future husband's mind. For Sylvia, today was the day she had won a landslide victory over Eleanor. She would become the legitimate wife of a CEO and live surrounded by luxury. She was already imagining the envious faces of her friends when they saw the opulence of the party. Damien hid in one of the hotel rooms rented for the couple's preparations. He paced back and forth in the room. Restless, he tried calling his mother again, hoping the old woman had changed her mind and would be willing to lend him her retirement savings to cover the hole opening up at his feet, but she didn't answer. Damien collapsed onto the sofa. He stared at the ceiling of the room, wondering how everything had turned into such chaos in such a short time. He remembered Eleanor's face in the courthouse, a calm, expressionless face. Suddenly, a bad premonition washed over him. Was Eleanor planning something? But Damien quickly dismissed the thought. In his opinion, Eleanor was too weak and foolish to do something so cruel. Damien convinced himself it was just a technical banking issue and that the next day everything would be back to normal. All he had to do was survive this night with his head held high. In another much quieter place, Eleanor was getting ready. She was at her family's private estate, a serene and secluded place. There was no panic or fuss. Eleanor sat in front of an antique teak dressing table. A trusted family makeup artist was applying a natural yet determined look to her face. Eleanor didn't want to look overdone. She didn't want to compete with the bride in terms of flashy makeup. She wanted to present herself as she was, classy, elegant, and untouchable. Eleanor chose a long, deep black silk gown, paired with a satin scarf of the same shade, fastened with a diamond brooch inherited from her grandmother. Her appearance exuded an aura of mourning and, at the same time, an intimidating strength. Once ready, Eleanor walked to the living room. Mr. Hayes was waiting for her there. The middle-aged man was dressed in an impeccable formal suit. Mr. Hayes looked at Eleanor with a mixture of admiration and concern. He knew how much it had hurt Eleanor to be betrayed for years, and he also knew how difficult the step she was about to take that night would be. Mr. Hayes asked in a grave voice if Eleanor was sure she wanted to do this in public. He offered other options, like letting the lawyers and police handle Damien without her having to attend the party. Mr. Hayes feared that Eleanor would be hurt seeing her ex-husband at the altar with another woman. Eleanor shook her head slowly while smiling faintly. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve and said in a very calm tone that the wound in her heart had dried up a long time ago. Her presence there was not to mourn her fate, but to ensure that justice was served with her own hands. Eleanor wanted to see the exact moment Damien's mask crumbled. She wanted Damien to know that the woman he had always belittled was the same one who could destroy him in the blink of an eye. Hearing that response, Mr. Hayes nodded in understanding. He no longer objected. He offered his arm to Eleanor. They walked out to a sleek, gleaming black luxury sedan waiting in the driveway. The car's engine purred softly, ready to take them to the battlefield. Back at the hotel, the sun had set, and guests were beginning to arrive. Luxury cars dropped off their passengers at the main lobby. The guests, consisting of Damien's business partners, Sylvia's high society friends, and some distant relatives, began to fill the ballroom foyer. They were amazed by the opulent decor. Food and drinks began to be served by waiters in impeccable uniforms. A melodious orchestra filled the room, creating a romantic and elegant atmosphere. Damien and Sylvia were already at the altar, greeting guests one by one. Damien forced a smile onto his face, though his eyes darted wildly around the room, fearing a debt collector would suddenly appear and make a scene. Sylvia whispered to Damien, praising how incredible the party was and how many important guests had attended. Damien just nodded stiffly. He saw the hotel manager standing in a corner, not far from the kitchen entrance, staring at him intently while holding a folder. Damien knew the manager was waiting for payment. Every time their eyes met, Damien quickly looked away, pretending to be busy greeting a guest. Damien's heart pounded to the rhythm of the accelerating music. He felt the spacious, air-conditioned room suddenly become cramped and hot. At 8 p.m. sharp, the main event was about to begin. The famous master of ceremonies, hired for a considerable sum, took the stage, ready to guide the event. The guests were already seated at their round tables, enjoying appetizers. The atmosphere was very festive. Laughter and light conversation could be heard everywhere. No one was aware of the tension the groom was feeling. Outside the main ballroom doors, which were tightly closed, a black sedan pulled up. A valet rushed to open the door. A pair of feet in gleaming patent leather shoes and high heels stepped out of the car. Eleanor stood tall in front of the hotel entrance, contemplating the majestic building. Beside her, Mr. Hayes adjusted his suit. They looked at each other for a moment and nodded. Eleanor walked forward with a firm stride. It was not simply the arrival of a late guest. It was the beginning of the end for Damien. The enormous, heavy ballroom door was the only barrier between the party full of falsehood inside and the painful truth that was about to enter. The wedding reception in the hotel ballroom was in full swing. The clinking of silverware against fine china created a background rhythm that accompanied the guests' conversations. Hundreds of people from the city's elite seemed to be enjoying the lavish banquet served on both sides of the room. The aroma of roasted meat, sweet pastries, and fresh flowers mingled, creating a fragrance of opulence that delighted the senses. In the center of the room, a 7-tier wedding cake stood majestically, adorned with intricate sugar ornaments and handmade edible flowers. Everything seemed perfect, at least to the eyes of the guests who were unaware of the financial drama drowning the groom. Damien stood next to the giant cake. In one hand, he held a crystal glass with a non-alcoholic sparkling beverage that resembled expensive champagne. He looked around with mixed feelings. On one hand, his ego was satisfied seeing so many important people at his party. There were business partners, company competitors, and Sylvia's high society friends who had always looked down on them. That night, Damien felt he had proven himself to be a small king in his own kingdom. However, on the other hand, the shadow of unpaid bills haunted him. He saw the hotel manager standing stiffly near the kitchen access door. His gaze never left Damien, like a jailer watching a prisoner. Damien tried to ignore that stare. He took a sip to moisten his throat, which was dry from nerves. The master of ceremonies, a young man in an impeccable suit with a characteristic baritone voice, took the main stage. He politely requested the attention of those present. The background music, which had been quite loud, softened. He announced it was time for the groom to say a few words, a speech of thanks and celebration of his new life. A loud round of applause echoed throughout the hall. Sylvia, standing next to Damien in her long-trained, sequin-filled wedding dress, nudged him while smiling broadly. She whispered to Damien to give a good speech and impress everyone. Damien nodded, straightened his tie, and walked to the microphone in the center of the altar stage. He took a deep breath, trying to gather the remnants of his confidence. He gripped the microphone stand tightly, as if it were his only lifeline at that moment. He began to speak. His voice trembled a little at first, but gradually it became strong and confident. He greeted the guests, thanking them for their presence. Then his speech began to deviate from a simple "thank you." Damien started to tell his success story, or rather, the version he had manipulated in his own mind. He spoke of how he had built his career from scratch, working hard day and night to grow the company he now led. He painted himself as a tenacious visionary who had conquered the tough business world without anyone's help. The guests listened attentively. Some partners who knew the company's history whispered among themselves, doubting Damien's claims, but they still applauded politely. Damien was encouraged by the audience's response. He began to touch on a more personal topic, Without directly mentioning Eleanor, Damien began to make indirect comments about his past. He said that for years he had felt held back by a domestic environment that didn't support his ambitions. He described his ex-wife as a rigid figure, without vision, unable to keep up with his lifestyle and forward thinking. Damien said he needed a partner who was an engine, not an anchor. He mentioned that living with someone who was not on his level, both in thought and appearance, was torture for a successful man like him. Sylvia, standing behind him, smiled triumphantly. She felt flattered, assuming all those implicit compliments were directed at her. Damien turned to Sylvia and held out his hand. Sylvia approached and took Damien's hand. Damien continued his speech, praising Sylvia to the skies. He called her a modern, intelligent, beautiful woman who understood the needs of a business leader. Damien shouted into the microphone, saying that tonight was proof he had found his soulmate, a woman worthy of accompanying him to the pinnacle of success. He concluded his speech by inviting all the guests to raise their glasses and toast to the bright future he would build with Sylvia and his business empire. To a future without limits, to freedom and true success, Damien exclaimed, his face flushed with euphoria. The guests raised their glasses in unison and cheered. Damien felt on top of the world. For a moment, he forgot about his declined credit cards. He forgot about the leasing threat. He felt invincible. However, just as the cheers began to die down and Damien was about to step down from the stage to cut the cake, something strange happened. The spotlight on him flickered once and then slowly dimmed. At first, Damien thought it was part of a dramatic effect prepared by the wedding planners. He smiled, waiting to see what surprise would appear. But the dimming of the lights felt different. It wasn't just the stage light, the main chandelier in the center of the ballroom also dimmed until it was almost out. The room, once brightly lit, became dim, creating a confusing atmosphere. The orchestra, which had been playing a beautiful melody, suddenly stopped. It wasn't by the conductor's order, but because the lights in their area went out completely, preventing them from reading their sheet music. The guests began to murmur. Whispers of confusion started to sound like the buzz of an angry swarm of bees. Damien looked at the lighting technician in a corner of the room, signaling for him to turn the lights back on, but the technician seemed to be frantically fiddling with the control panel. In another corner, the hotel manager was speaking into his earpiece with a very serious expression, but he didn't seem as scared as the technician. In fact, he seemed calm, as if he knew this was going to happen. He gave a brief instruction and then looked directly at the altar stage, into Damien's eyes. It was not the respectful gaze towards a VIP client, but the cold look of an executioner who had just received the order to fire. Damien felt the hair on his arms stand up. He tried to speak into the microphone again to calm the guests. "Don't worry, folks. It's just a small technical issue. Please remain calm. The hotel's generator is probably kicking in." "A little patience," Damien said with a forced laugh, but his voice was not heard. The microphone in his hand was dead. The entire sound system in the room had been disabled. An unnatural silence began to envelop the grand hall. The laughter and conversations of the guests slowly faded, replaced by growing curiosity and tension. Sylvia pulled on Damien's arm forcefully. "Honey, what's happening? You said this hotel was the best. How can the lights and sound go out like this?" "What an embarrassment," Sylvia hissed in a harsh voice. Damien didn't answer. He was busy tapping the head of the silent microphone. Amid the dimness of the emergency lights that were beginning to come on along the edges of the walls, everyone's attention suddenly shifted, not to the stage, but to the main ballroom door, located at the opposite end, facing the altar. The giant, carved double wooden door began to open slowly. No employee opened it. It seemed to move by a newly activated automatic mechanism. The heavy creak of the hinges echoed in the silent room, drawing all eyes. A cold draft from the outer hallway entered, bringing with it an aura far more foreboding than simple darkness. The giant door was now fully open, revealing the silhouettes of two people standing in the threshold, backlit by the bright light of the outer hallway. The contrast of the light made their figures look dramatic, like heroes, or perhaps villains, appearing in the final act of a play. The silent hall seemed to hold its breath. No guest dared to speak. All eyes were fixed on the two figures. Slowly, They began to enter. The sound of their footsteps was clear and rhythmic on the hard marble floor. Click, clack, click. The decisive sound of high heels mixed with the steady tread of a man's shoes, creating a rhythm of intimidation that broke the silence. The female figure was Eleanor. She was wearing a very elegant outfit, very different from the simple appearance Damien was used to seeing at home. Her long dress was a dark velvet that absorbed the light, giving her a mysterious and authoritative air. Her scarf was perfectly placed, framing a serene face that nonetheless radiated a piercing coldness. She wore no excessive jewelry, just an antique brooch on her left breast, but her mere presence felt more valuable than all the golden decorations in the room. Walking beside her was a middle-aged man with an upright posture and extraordinary authority. It was Mr. Hayes. He wore a perfectly tailored formal suit of European cut, his hair slicked back, highlighting his firm, experienced face. As they advanced through the room, the guests near the entrance instinctively moved aside, creating a wide aisle through the crowd. Some older guests, veteran business partners in the city, looked surprised. They recognized Mr. Hayes. The whispers started again, but this time with a tone of awe and respect. "Isn't that Mr. Hayes, the owner of the Alcazar Group?" one man whispered to his wife. "What's a tycoon like him doing at Damien's party?" another asked. "And who's the woman next to him?" "That's not his wife. That's Damien's ex-wife," exclaimed another guest who recognized Eleanor. A shockwave spread quickly among the guests, but Eleanor and Mr. Hayes continued walking in a straight line, their eyes fixed on the altar stage. Damien, standing on the dimly lit stage, squinted, trying to recognize the unwanted guests. When Eleanor's face became visible under the emergency light, Damien's heart seemed to stop for a moment. He couldn't believe his eyes. Eleanor, the woman he had just divorced and insulted in his speech, was now entering his party with her head held high, on the arm of a powerful man. Shame, anger, and confusion mingled in Damien's chest, but what scared him most was the man beside Eleanor. Damien had seen that face in international business magazines and in a photo hanging in the lobby of the headquarters. It was Mr. Hayes, the legendary figure who controlled many large companies, including the one where Damien worked. He had never met him in person, as Damien's level was considered too low for meetings with the primary shareholder. Sylvia, who didn't understand who Mr. Hayes was and didn't care about his authoritative aura, burst into a rage. She felt her moment had been ruined. She grabbed another microphone from the ceremony table, hoping it would work, but it was also dead. Finally, she shouted in a shrill voice that broke the tension. "Hey, who let this peasant in? This is a private event." "Security, where's security? Get them out of here now." Her shout echoed, sounding vulgar and classless, making some guests frown, uncomfortable with the bride's behavior. Damien tried to calm Sylvia down, realizing the situation was dangerous, but Sylvia was already beside herself. She pointed at Eleanor's face from a distance. Several uniformed security guards in black who were at the edges of the room moved, but not to throw Eleanor out. Instead, they formed a barrier on both sides of the aisle where Eleanor and Mr. Hayes were walking, as if they were escorting very high-level guests. Sylvia's jaw dropped at the scene. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Throw them out." "I'm paying you," Sylvia screamed again, her voice starting to sound hysterical. The head of security glanced at Sylvia briefly with an impassive expression and then looked straight ahead, completely ignoring the bride's order. Eleanor paid no attention to Sylvia's shouts. She didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't even blink. To Eleanor, Sylvia's screams were just unimportant background noise. She and Mr. Hayes continued walking until they reached the front of the stage area, right in front of the nearest round table, reserved for VIP guests, the direct family, the table that Damien's and Sylvia's parents were supposed to occupy. But the table was empty because Sylvia's parents were in the restroom and Damien's mother had refused to attend. Mr. Hayes pulled out one of the chairs with a gentlemanly gesture, inviting Eleanor to sit. Eleanor sat down elegantly, her back straight, and placed her handbag on the table. Mr. Hayes sat beside her. As soon as they were seated, as if on command, a head waiter hurried over with a tray containing 2 glasses of premium mineral water and placed them with utmost care in front of them. The waiter gave a deep bow, much more respectful than when he had served Damien. This scene made Damien tremble even more. He felt his knees weaken. He realized that in this hotel, the supreme power was not held by the one renting the hall, but by the owner of the building, and the gestures of the hotel staff made it clear to whom their loyalty belonged. Silence once again enveloped the room. There was no music or clinking of plates. All the guests waited to see what would happen next. Eleanor picked up her water glass, took a calm sip, and then looked up at Damien on the stage. Her gaze was not one of anger from a betrayed wife, but of pity from an owner towards an employee who was about to be fired. Damien felt stripped bare by that look. He wanted to run, but his feet were glued to the stage floor. Mr. Hayes stood up slowly. He didn't shout. He simply raised his hand slightly in a gesture. Miraculously, the main spotlight that had been off came back on, but only one, and it was aimed directly at Mr. Hayes, not the bride and groom. Mr. Hayes reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a silver wireless microphone, the only working microphone in the hall because his own team had brought it. He pressed the power button, and a small feedback hum sounded, indicating the sound system had been taken over. "Pardon me for interrupting your little party." Mr. Hayes's voice sounded deep, clear, and authoritative, filling every corner of the room through the main speakers. "I believe there has been a small misunderstanding in your speech from a moment ago. Mr. Damien, you spoke of building a company from scratch, of success through your own merits." Mr. Hayes let out a small laugh, a laugh that sounded incredibly dismissive. He walked calmly towards the stage steps while Damien backed away step by step, frightened. "Perhaps it's time for those present to know who the true architect behind the empire you claim is, and who is simply a stowaway who has made himself comfortable in it." Sylvia, who still didn't understand the situation, tried to snatch the microphone from a trembling Damien, but he stopped her. "No, Sylvia, shut up," Damien whispered hoarsely. His face was ashen. He recognized Mr. Hayes's voice. He recognized that authority. He knew his arrival was not to congratulate him, nor to ruin the party in a vulgar way like throwing water or pulling hair. His arrival was to carry out a public execution. And Damien, on the magnificent stage he had rented with a bounced check, felt like a defendant waiting for his death sentence to be read in front of hundreds of witnesses. Mr. Hayes's footsteps ascending the altar stage steps felt heavy and slow, as if each tread were a judge's gavel striking the bench. Damien retreated step by step. His face was as pale as paper. Cold sweat soaked his forehead, ruining his expensive hairstyle. He wanted to scream for security, but the words were stuck in his throat. Besides, he knew the security in this building was no longer on his side. Behind Damien, Sylvia still stood, a mixture of confusion and anger. She still hadn't fully grasped the danger they were in. She just felt annoyed that her moment of glory had been interrupted by an old man she didn't know. Sylvia tried to step forward to insult Mr. Hayes, but Damien quickly spread his arms, blocking her path. Damien knew who the man before them was, and he knew that confronting Mr. Hayes openly was suicide. Mr. Hayes now stood at the center of the stage, right next to Damien. The difference in aura between the two men was striking. Damien, in his expensive groom's suit, looked small and scared, while Mr. Hayes, in his conservative business suit, looked like a giant dominating the room. Mr. Hayes didn't speak immediately. He let the silence linger for a few seconds, allowing the tension to build in everyone's minds. He looked at Damien with an unreadable expression. It wasn't explosive anger, but a condescending gaze, as if observing a small insect lost in the wrong place. Then Mr. Hayes turned to the hundreds of guests still glued to their seats. He smiled slightly, a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. With a relaxed gesture, Mr. Hayes raised his left hand and snapped his fingers toward the control room at the back of the hall. A moment later, the giant projection screen installed on the wall behind the altar lit up. The screen was supposed to display a slideshow of romantic photos from Damien and Sylvia's pre-wedding shoot abroad, set to a love song. But what appeared on the giant screen were not photos of lovers, but an extremely complex and detailed corporate organizational chart. The name Alcazar Group appeared in large letters at the top, in bold, gold font. The guests squinted, trying to read the small print below. Several business people sitting in the front rows gasped, covering their mouths in disbelief. Mr. Hayes began to speak again into his microphone. His voice resonated clearly and firmly throughout the hall. He explained that for a long time, there had been a misunderstanding about who truly steered the great ship called the company where Damien worked. Mr. Hayes pointed to the screen with his finger. At the top of the organizational chart, in the position of chairwoman of the board and majority shareholder, was a name very familiar to Damien, but unknown to most of the guests who only knew his facade. The name was Eleanor. Yes, Eleanor. The woman sitting calmly at the VIP table, sipping her mineral water, was the rightful owner of 90% of the shares in the corporate group that encompassed the subsidiary where Damien worked. Mr. Hayes then moved his finger down the chart, past the board of directors, the operations managers, until it stopped on a small box in the lower center. There, Damien's name was written with the title, CEO, Employment at Will Contract. Mr. Hayes read the text with a mocking tone, emphasizing the words, Employment at Will Contract, over and over. He explained to the audience that Damien's position was not that of an owner, a founder, or even a strategic decision-maker. Damien was simply an employee who had been given a fancy title because of his marriage to the owner. Damien was just a puppet displayed in the shop window to maintain the family's image, while all crucial business decisions were made by the board of directors under Eleanor's direction. Damien's face turned red with shame. His secret had been exposed in front of hundreds of people. He had always boasted of being a self-made CEO, the brain behind the company's success. Now everyone knew he was just a lucky employee who had married his boss. The whispers among the guests grew louder. They began to laugh at their own foolishness for believing Damien's lies. Sylvia, her eyes fixed on the screen, felt her knees buckle. She looked at Damien in horror. Her dream of becoming a tycoon's wife shattered in seconds. She realized Damien had lied to her about the true extent of his power. Unable to bear such humiliation, Damien tried to defend himself. He snatched the dead microphone from Sylvia and shouted with all his might. Though his voice wasn't amplified by the speakers, he screamed that the organizational chart was a lie. He screamed that he had worked hard day and night, negotiating with clients and generating profits for the company. He claimed that assets like the luxury house, sports cars, and apartment were the fruits of his own labor, purchased in his name. Damien tried to convince the guests that it was all slander from an ex-wife who couldn't move on. He pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor, accusing her of sabotage out of jealousy for seeing him happy with Sylvia. Mr. Hayes laughed at Damien's pathetic defense. He gestured to the operator again. The image on the projector screen changed once more. This time, it displayed a list of the assets Damien had claimed. The screen clearly showed the property titles for the house, the registrations for the luxury cars, and the deed for the apartment. However, in the column for the legal owner, Damien's name did not appear even once. All assets were under the name of Alcazar Investments, Incorporated, or in Eleanor's personal name. Mr. Hayes explained patiently, as if teaching a child, that all the luxury amenities Damien had enjoyed for 5 years, from the watch on his wrist to the car he used to pick up Sylvia, were inventoried company assets, loaned as part of his position. You own nothing, Damien, Mr. Hayes's voice cut through Damien's shouts, sounding cold and sharp. Even the suit you're wearing now. The bill was charged to the company credit card that was blocked this very morning. You are just a stowaway who got too comfortable in first class and forgot he never bought a ticket. Mr. Hayes moved closer to Damien, intimidating him with his imposing figure. Damien backed away until his back hit the ceremony table behind him. He was trapped, with nowhere to run. Sylvia, who could no longer handle the situation, began to cry hysterically. She felt completely deceived. She shook Damien's arm, demanding an explanation. Damien, what does all this mean? You said the house was yours. You said you were the owner of the company. So all this time, I was about to marry a mere employee? Sylvia screamed, no longer caring about her image. Damien tried to calm her down, whispering that he would fix it later, that he could sue Eleanor. But Sylvia roughly pushed Damien's hand away. Sylvia's makeup began to run with her tears, giving her a disheveled and pathetic appearance on that magnificent stage. Below the stage, Eleanor remained seated calmly. She wasn't smirking or laughing. She simply watched the drama on stage with an impassive face. Inside, she felt relieved. The burden of lies Damien had hidden was finally lifted. Eleanor remembered how many times Damien had belittled her in front of her friends, saying she knew nothing about business when it was she who quietly cleaned up Damien's administrative messes. It was she who injected personal funds when Damien's projects failed. Tonight, Eleanor was only taking back what was rightfully hers, the truth. Mr. Hayes turned his attention back to Damien. He said the humiliation wasn't over yet. He reminded Damien of the document he had signed that morning at the courthouse. Damien frowned, trying to remember the contents of the document. He remembered signing it quickly because he wanted to be free. He remembered his lawyer telling him it was just a standard divorce agreement with no claim on marital assets. Damien wondered what that agreement had to do with the current situation. Mr. Hayes, as if he could read his mind, pulled a dark blue document folder from his jacket, holding it up for all to see. You may think this is just the end of your marriage, Damien, but it's actually the beginning of your financial ruin, Mr. Hayes said enigmatically, preparing the final blow that would bury Damien alive. The atmosphere in the hotel ballroom shifted dramatically. If it had previously resembled a shameful circus, now the tension was that of an execution chamber. The guests held their breath. Their eyes were fixed on the dark blue folder Mr. Hayes was holding. Damien looked at the folder with extreme apprehension. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. He tried to remember every clause he had skimmed over that morning, but his brain was frozen with panic. He felt he had overlooked something fatal, a hidden trap in the pile of legal papers he had underestimated. Mr. Hayes opened the folder with a slow, deliberate movement, mentally torturing Damien. The sound of the pages turning, amplified by the microphone, created a dramatic and terrifying effect. Mr. Hayes pulled out a sheet with a seal at the bottom, where Damien's signature stood out clearly in still fresh black ink. Mr. Hayes held the paper with both hands, read it silently for a moment, and then looked Damien directly in the eyes. His gaze was filled with irrefutable legal certainty. Mr. Hayes began to explain that in the world of high-level business, every signature has consequences, and negligence in reading a contract is an unforgivable sin. Damien. Mr. Hayes's voice broke the silence. You were so arrogant when you signed this. Did you think you were just discarding Eleanor from your life? Did you believe that by waiving your claim to marital assets, you had won? Mr. Hayes shook his head slowly. A smile of insulting pity formed on his lips. Unfortunately, you didn't read Article 14, Section 3, of the rights waiver agreement you voluntarily signed. Damien was stunned. What article was that? His lawyer hadn't mentioned anything about an Article 14. Damien looked toward the exit, hoping his lawyer would be there to defend him, but there was no sign of him. He was alone. Mr. Hayes brought the microphone to his lips, preparing to deliver the sentence that would be the final hammer blow to Damien's life. His voice grew deeper and more serious. Listen carefully, Damien, and all of you as witnesses, Mr. Hayes said loudly. He took a brief breath before continuing. Your signature this morning was not just for a divorce. It was the approval to activate a total indemnification clause which states, should the second party, meaning you, renounce his status as the spouse of the primary shareholder, all company losses incurred during his tenure, as well as all personal expenses made with company resources without written authorization, will instantly convert into a personal debt to be paid in full within 24 hours. The sentence echoed, bouncing off the ballroom walls, entering Damien's ears, and exploding in his brain. Damien staggered backward as if he had just been slapped hard. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the hard stage floor. He tried to process those words. Personal debt. All company losses. Damien knew perfectly well that during his 5-year tenure, many projects had failed because he was busier playing golf and vacationing than managing the business. The value of those losses, if accumulated, could reach millions. And the cost of tonight's party, $500,000, would also be considered an unauthorized expense, as Eleanor had blocked his access before the transaction. Mr. Hayes wasn't finished. He continued his explanation with an increasingly pressing tone. According to the forensic audit we conducted last week, the total losses from failed projects and the misuse of operational funds for your lifestyle over these 5 years amount to $10 million. Add to that the cost of tonight's venue and catering, which you charged to an already blocked company account, your total debt stands at $10,500,000. The figure was pronounced with perfect clarity, leaving the guests stunned. A collective gasp was heard. Over $10 million. It was an immense amount of money, impossible for a now jobless and assetless Damien to repay. And since you no longer have any assets to your name, Mr. Hayes continued with a final tone. Both civil and criminal laws will be applied simultaneously. Just as Mr. Hayes finished his sentence, the side door of the ballroom burst open. This time, it wasn't waiters who entered, but a squad of uniformed police officers, accompanied by several people in suits carrying briefcases. Eleanor's company legal team walked swiftly toward the stage, parting the crowd of frightened guests. The sound of the police officers' boots was terrifying, a sign that this was no longer a simple domestic dispute, but the enforcement of the law. Damien, still sitting on the stage floor, tried to back away, dragging his body to get away from the approaching officers. His face was soaked in tears and sweat. He turned to Sylvia, pleading for help. "Sylvia, help me. Call your father. Ask him to lend me money," Damien begged desperately. However, Sylvia's reaction was completely unexpected for Damien, though predictable for everyone else. Sylvia recoiled from Damien as if he had a contagious disease. She pulled away from Damien's hand, which was trying to grab her dress. "Don't touch me!" Sylvia screamed hysterically. "I don't know anything. You're a con artist. You said you were rich. I don't want to be saddled with your debts." Sylvia took off her engagement ring and threw it in Damien's face. She then tried to run off the stage, but Sylvia's escape was blocked by the hotel manager and several security staff who intercepted her at the stairs. The manager held a long invoice. "Excuse me, miss." "Sylvia," the manager said firmly but politely. "According to the booking contract, your name is listed as the secondary responsible party. If the primary party fails to pay, you cannot leave this venue until this $500,000 bill is settled, or you will have to accompany us to the police station to give a statement as a witness in a case of service fraud." Sylvia's face turned paler than her wedding dress. She screamed, cried, and begged to be let go, but the security staff blocked her path. Meanwhile, 2 police officers were already beside Damien. One of them read him an arrest warrant. Damien was charged with embezzlement of company funds in the course of his duties and attempted fraud with a bad check. The officer pulled on Damien's limp hand, forced him to his feet, and snapped cold metal handcuffs onto his wrists. The click of the handcuffs sounded loud in Damien's ears, marking the end of his freedom. Damien sobbed loudly. His pride was shattered. He looked toward the VIP table, searching for Eleanor. He saw his ex-wife rise slowly, adjusting her scarf, which had been slightly moved by the air conditioning. Damien screamed Eleanor's name. "Eleanor, help me! Forgive me! It was a mistake! Eleanor, don't do this to me! We once loved each other." His cries sounded pathetic, filled with belated regret, but Eleanor was unmoved. Her face remained serene, as if she were looking at a stranger. Eleanor showed no sign of helping. She had given him too many chances over the past 5 years, and Damien had always squandered them. This was the karma Damien had sown, and now it was time to reap the whirlwind. Eleanor only tilted her head slightly in a sign of respect to Mr. Hayes. Then she turned her back to the stage, indicating that the show was over and she was not interested in seeing the next act. The police began to drag Damien off the stage. The guests immediately took out their phones, recording the shameful scene. Camera flashes illuminated Damien's swollen face and a hysterical Sylvia. The next morning, their faces would surely grace the covers of newspapers and trend on social media with humiliating headlines. Damien lowered his head, trying to hide his face, but it was futile. Amid the chaos, Mr. Hayes's sentence about the indemnification clause echoed in his head like a curse, a single sentence that had turned him from an arrogant CEO into a prisoner with a $10 million debt. In a single night, he had fallen from the top of a skyscraper he had built on a foundation of sand, and the impact with the ground was unbelievably painful. The chaos in the hotel ballroom reached an unimaginable boiling point. The room, which should have been filled with happy laughter and romance, had turned into the noisy, shameful scene of a crime. The faint sound of sirens could be heard from outside the hotel lobby, heightening the already suffocating tension. On stage, Damien still squirmed in the grasp of two sturdy police officers. He screamed, cried, and begged a sight that contrasted sharply with the arrogant figure who had given a speech just minutes before. His expensive groom's suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his face wet with a mixture of tears and cold sweat. He looked like a madman who had lost his mind, repeating endlessly that it was all just a nightmare. Meanwhile, Sylvia was living her own hell at the foot of the stage stairs. She was surrounded by the hotel manager and several vendor representatives who had appeared out of nowhere. Apparently, the news of Damien's arrest and the freezing of his assets had spread quickly among the hotel staff and associated vendors. The caterer, the floral decorator, and even the sound system manager, who also apparently hadn't been fully paid, now surrounded Sylvia, demanding immediate payment. Sylvia shrieked hysterically. The long train of her wedding dress was being stepped on by the shoes of those surrounding her. Her heavy makeup was streaking, melting the black mascara down her cheeks and creating hideous black lines like the tears of a ghost. She tried to point at Damien, screaming that she knew nothing about the money, but the collectors didn't care. Sylvia's name was on the contract as a guarantor, and the law is not moved by crocodile tears. Amid the uproar, Eleanor slowly rose from her VIP chair. Her movements were calm and calculated, as if she were in a different time dimension from the chaos around her. Mr. Hayes stood by her side, offering protection in case the crowd got out of control. But Eleanor raised her right hand slightly, indicating she could handle it. Eleanor smoothed the folds of her black velvet dress, adjusted the brooch on her chest, and began to walk toward the stage area. Her steps were slow but firm. The guests, who were busy recording the scene with their phones, instinctively lowered their cameras and made way for her. Eleanor's aura at that moment was so strong it radiated the authority of a winner who needs no cheers to celebrate her victory. Damien, being dragged down the stage stairs, saw Eleanor approaching. His red, swollen eyes gleamed with a false hope. He struggled, trying to break free from the police to get closer to Eleanor. He thought that Eleanor, the woman who once loved him so much and always forgave his mistakes, would soften at the sight of his condition. Damien screamed his ex-wife's name in a hoarse, pathetic voice. He begged for forgiveness, saying it was all a mistake, that Sylvia had incited him, that he still loved Eleanor. Damien lowered his pride to its absolute minimum, prostrating himself on the cold marble floor, despite his hands being cuffed behind his back. He hoped Eleanor would ask the police to release him, or at least pay his debt as she used to. Back when Damien got into gambling trouble or debts from his lifestyle, Eleanor stopped 2 steps from the kneeling Damien. She looked down at him from behind her long eyelashes. There was no anger on Eleanor's face, only a cold, empty look, as if she were seeing a stranger she had never met. Eleanor remembered all of Damien's humiliations during their 5-year marriage. She remembered how Damien called her a boring woman, how he cleverly hid his affairs, and how he had subtly pushed her out of the company's social life. All those bitter memories swirled in Eleanor's head, but strangely, she no longer felt pain. She only felt pity for how small the soul of the man before her was. "Eleanor, please, help me. Pay this debt, I'll pay you back. I promise to change." "Don't let the police take me," Damien begged. Saliva and snot mingled on his face. A truly disgusting sight for anyone to see. The officer holding Damien looked at Eleanor, waiting for her reaction. Would there be an intervention or a new drama? Eleanor sighed briefly and then spoke in a soft voice, but one that reached Damien's ears clearly. "Damien, for 5 years, I always cleaned up your messes. I turned a blind eye when you took money from the house to have fun. I stayed silent when you passed yourself off as the owner of my company. I gave you countless opportunities to mature and behave like an adult." Eleanor paused, letting her words sink in. "But today, you chose your own destiny. The signature on that divorce agreement was your choice. This lavish party was your choice. And that woman over there, Eleanor pointed to Sylvia, who was sobbing loudly while being held by security, was also your choice. I am done being your savior. Now, learn to be a man responsible for his own decisions. Hearing that, Damien's hopes were shattered. He realized that Eleanor had truly closed the door to her heart forever. Eleanor was no longer the submissive wife he could manipulate. Damien roared loudly, a sound of despair that echoed horribly. The police pulled him up again, forcing him to his feet and dragging him toward the side exit. Damien kept looking back, watching Eleanor, who remained upright and unshakable until her figure disappeared behind the guarded double doors. Once Damien was taken away, Eleanor turned her gaze to Sylvia. Sylvia, seeing Damien being dragged away by the police, panicked even more. She tried to break free from the hotel manager's grip, but she wasn't strong enough. Seeing Eleanor looking at her, Sylvia changed her tactic. She switched from anger to pleading. Mrs. Eleanor, please, help me. I didn't know anything. Damien deceived me. I'm just a victim. As a woman, please have mercy on me. Sylvia pleaded with a pitiful face, hoping that female solidarity could save her. Eleanor approached Sylvia, looked at the expensive wedding dress she was wearing, a dress bought with the company credit card that was now part of Damien's debt. Eleanor smiled slightly, very slightly. She reached into her handbag and took out a white envelope, the kind that usually holds a wedding gift. Sylvia saw the envelope with bright eyes, thinking Eleanor would give her a check to pay the hotel bill and free her. Eleanor held the envelope out to Sylvia. Sylvia snatched it quickly, her hands trembling. She impatiently tore the envelope open. However, her face turned pale when she saw its contents. The envelope was empty. There was no money, no check, just a small note with the text, "Invoice for wedding dress pending payment." Eleanor had picked up the note from her usual boutique, which had also been a victim of Damien's false promises. "You wanted a high-end lifestyle, didn't you, Sylvia?" Eleanor said in a low voice, almost whispering in Sylvia's ear. "You wanted to be on the same level as Damien? Congratulations! Now you are truly on the same level. Both in debt, both about to be prosecuted by the law, and both with nothing." Eleanor stepped back, looking at Sylvia with pity. "Enjoy the rest of the wedding cake, dear. It might be the last decent meal you taste before they serve you prison rations." Sylvia was speechless, completely floored. Eleanor's words slapped her harder than a physical blow. She realized she had lost spectacularly. She had bet on the wrong horse and now had to pay the price. The hotel manager signaled for the security staff to take Sylvia to the administration office to handle the paperwork with the police waiting there. Sylvia was dragged away, sobbing, past the row of guests who were once her high society friends, the same friends she used to boast to. Now they were busy recording her downfall to make it the gossip of the day in their messaging groups. Sylvia covered her face with the remnants of her torn dress, unable to bear the shame. The ballroom began to slowly empty of the main drama, leaving behind the guests who were still glued to their seats, shocked by the real-life spectacle they had just witnessed. Eleanor turned and rejoined Mr. Hayes, who was waiting for her with a proud smile. There were no victory cheers, no celebrations. Eleanor just felt tired, but it was a liberating kind of tired. She took her handbag and walked with Mr. Hayes toward the main exit. The guests in their path bowed their heads respectfully this time, a sincere respect born of admiration, not politeness. Eleanor walked on that red carpet, not as a bride, but as a queen who had just cleaned her palace of trash. She didn't look back, leaving behind the ruins of a $500,000 party that was now just a pile of debt and bad memories for the traitor. A month had passed since the scandalous wedding night. The news of the lavish party that ended in handcuffs was still a hot topic in the media and on digital platforms. The faces of Damien and Sylvia appeared on the covers of crime tabloids and business magazines, but with a very different narrative than the one they had dreamed of. Damien became the symbol of the downfall of a corrupt and greedy young executive, while Sylvia became the living example of a hedonistic and destructive lifestyle. Investigations revealed that Damien had embezzled company funds for years to finance his luxurious lifestyle and infidelities. The total audited losses reached a fantastic figure that left the public stunned. Behind the bars of a pretrial detention center, Damien sat reflecting in the corner of a cramped and stuffy cell. He no longer wore expensive suits or designer watches. His body was now covered in a faded orange prison jumpsuit. His hair, once always impeccable, was now messy and starting to grow out of control. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and surrounded by dark circles from lack of sleep. Every night, remorse tormented him. He had lost everything: his position, his reputation, his wealth, and the woman who had sincerely loved him. His mother had visited him once, only to scold him and tell him the entire family was ashamed of his actions. There was no defense or help from renowned lawyers because he had no money to pay them. Damien was completely alone, saddled with a $10 million debt he didn't know how he would ever repay. Sylvia's fate was no less wretched. Although she was not imprisoned like Damien, as her role was considered passive participation in the embezzlement, Sylvia faced civil lawsuits that led to total bankruptcy. All the luxury items Damien had given, her handbags, shoes, jewelry, and even the car that was still unpaid for, were confiscated by the authorities and the finance company as evidence and seized assets. Sylvia was evicted from her rental apartment for non-payment. Her high society friends distanced themselves, blocked her number, and excluded her from their circles. Now Sylvia lived in a small rented room on the outskirts of the city, working odd jobs for a small online store, while being constantly pursued by debt collectors from the party vendors, who still demanded payment for the rest of the catering bill. The beauty and luxury she had so idolized had vanished, covered by the shadow of debt and shame. Meanwhile, in a quiet, green area outside the city's hustle and bustle, a very different situation was unfolding. A large building with modern yet welcoming architecture stood majestically. A plaque at the entrance read, "Alcazar Education Foundation." On the green lawn, orphaned children ran about happily in clean, decent uniforms. On the building's terrace, Eleanor watched them with a sincere smile on her lips. Her face looked much fresher and more radiant than a month ago. The heavy burden that had oppressed her chest was completely gone. She wore an elegant work outfit, combining professionalism and simplicity. Mr. Hayes came out the main door of the building carrying a folder with a monthly report. He approached Eleanor and handed it to her. "This month's financial report, Miss Eleanor. Since the management restructuring and clearing out the parasites in the company, our profits have increased by 30%. Investors have regained confidence in the Alcazar Group." Mr. Hayes smiled with satisfaction. He was proud to see his niece taking full control with wisdom. Eleanor accepted the folder, glanced through it briefly, and nodded in pleasure. It turns out running a company wasn't as scary as Damien used to say. With honesty and the right team, everything ran smoothly. "Thank you, Uncle Alexander. Without your help, I would probably still be trapped in that illusion of fear," Eleanor said sincerely. She closed the folder and looked at the clear blue sky. "From this month's profits, please allocate 50% to renovating the girls' dormitory out back and to scholarships for these children's education through college. The rest to the company's reserves for expansion capital." Mr. Hayes nodded. "A wise decision. By the way, the lawyer just reported. Damien's sentence is out. He has been sentenced to 12 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution. The old house where you lived has officially reverted to you, Mr. Hayes delivered the news in a neutral tone, like a simple report. Eleanor was silent for a moment upon hearing Damien's name in the house. She felt a little nostalgia, but no longing. It was a feeling of relief, because that dark chapter of her life was truly over. "Sell the house, Uncle. I don't need the memories there. Donate the proceeds from the sale to build a community center in the town we sponsor. I want to cleanse every trace of that past and turn it into something useful." Eleanor then walked toward her new black sedan parked in the driveway. Her driver opened the door for her respectfully. Before getting in, Eleanor turned one last time toward the foundation building. She saw the children laughing freely, living a simple life, but one full of affection. She realized something important. True happiness doesn't lie in $100,000 parties, in flaunting on social media, or in false recognition from others. True happiness is in inner peace, in an intact dignity, and in the ability to be useful to others. Eleanor got into the car. The cool air from the climate control greeted her. She leaned back in her seat, feeling light now. She took out her phone, opened the photo gallery, and deleted an old album containing her wedding photos with Damien. One by one, the photos disappeared from digital memory, just like the pain from her heart. Then, she put her phone away and looked at the straight road through the window. "To headquarters, please," Eleanor ordered her driver softly. The sedan started moving slowly, leaving the foundation behind, making its way through the busy city streets toward the skyscraper where Eleanor would preside over her first board meeting as the sole recognized owner. The sun shone brightly, illuminating the road ahead, as if the universe were blessing her new beginning. Eleanor smiled, this time a smile for herself. She knew her life had just begun. And the greatest lesson she had learned from all this was that sometimes a woman's silence doesn't mean she is weak or foolish, but that she is devising a strategy to win the war without needing many words. A perfect checkmate.